You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that.
This is not Christian.
Those are all Christian presuppositions.
They're not.
I guess
They're not
just
unique.
maybe
They're not uniquely Christian. You don't get to just declare that something was said in your book and therefore it's yours. Okay? That would be like me right now. I'm going to create a religion called Oliverism, and it says you shouldn't murder. And if someone's like lives in accordance with it, I'm like, well, that's an Oliveristic principle. You're in adherence with Oliveristic morality. No, that's not how it works. It's not unique to Christianity.
What does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Aim up.
Okay.
Okay?
Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I hope you all have been staying safe if you've been out protesting, whether it be the No Kings protests that have been happening or the protesting against specifically the deportations that have been happening. I know there have been some unrest at those, unfortunately, almost exclusively initiated by law enforcement. So if you've been out there, absolutely stay safe and take time for yourself as well. I know sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming in the world we're living in to kind of focus on certain things and get down about those things, lose hope. And I think it's really important. Make sure to take care of yourself. Obviously, your voice is important. Obviously, your activism is important. But of course, in order to be at your highest, performing to your fullest potential and making a difference, you have to first be taking care of yourself. So, definitely take a moment if you need to just, shut off the news for a little bit. Obviously, of course, it's a privilege to do that. But if you have that privilege, I'd recommend exercising it ever so often. If you haven't noticed, sometimes I go a couple days without posting because it's helpful to kind of just detox a little bit so I can come back at my strongest and provide this content for you guys that I know you enjoy. So I hope you guys have been enjoying that. Obviously, I'm sure my latest post, which was pretty unedited, and there's some things I will do differently if I decide to do street debates. I think particularly with that individual, it was really difficult to record with my phone and hold it up and get us both in the frame. So at some point I'll try to figure something else out if I keep doing that. But it was an interesting experience getting down there and just having some conversations with people and also protesting against increasingly authoritarian actions being taken by the Trump administration. So because all of that was pretty interesting, and I had a good experience there, but I know that other people's experience protesting has not been as good for them. They have not been as fortunate. So I just wish everyone the best of luck out there and whatever they're doing. And yeah, I'm trying to think about some other news before we get into this video that you guys tuned into. Obviously, as always, feel free to skip this section. There's chapter titles and chapter cards, so you can skip around. But one more piece of news, I'll be flying out to LA this weekend for another Jubilee video. I can't reveal anything about that until the video is released, but I can say that I will be on another episode of Jubilee. I know that's kind of how I mainly got started in this realm earlier this year, and I know a lot of you followed me from there. So I will be coming back to Jubilee coming up this weekend. I'll be flying out there, and it should be a fun episode. I think it'll be one that you guys enjoy, so definitely stay tuned to that. Subscribe to my channel here. I will definitely be reacting to that video, the one I'm in, the same way I'm reacting to this one, and I reacted to the previous videos I was in. So I think it's going to be a really fun time. And yeah, so I'm trying to think. I think that's kind of all I've got before we jump in. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. Watching Jordan Peterson get absolutely pummeled for an hour and a half debating 20 atheists. I first want to clarify before we watch, because I usually just like to keep you guys completely informed on this. This is not a blind reaction. I actually had a few friends who were in this episode, so I did end up watching it right when it came out because I wanted to see how they did. So, and you also can't really get away from this type of video. It's been all over, everyone talking about Peterson's poor and terrible performance. So I've seen this in its entirety. I watched it and I've seen many clips, but I've not extensively prepared. So this is not something where I've meticulously gone through. I try not to do that for these types of videos because I just want you guys to see my, raw would be unfair because I have seen it. But just, my thoughts. I'm just saying what comes to mind when I hear what he's saying. I haven't really watched this since it came out about I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's what you guys are going to get. You're going to get my raw, unfiltered reactions, and I hope you enjoy that. So without further ado, let's get into it.
You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm
That's a
done with
wild comeback. That was so clean.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists.
All right, let's get into it.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
All right, let's get into it.
Good
there's
afternoon,
Cade.
Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
My friends,
So
he's
this
awesome.
claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a
Yeah.
generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but
Yeah.
my experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined
Hold on, can we first see how ridiculous that is? Someone might be an atheist because they've literally been hurt by God. That makes no sense, because in order for someone to feel like they've literally been hurt by God, they would have to believe that God exists in order for God to hurt them. So that doesn't make any sense. Maybe they would decide that God does exist, but God is not worthy of their worship, but that person is not really an atheist, because theism is the belief in God. So I guess that person would believe in God, but believe that they ought not be worshipped, which really wouldn't fit the definition of atheism. So I guess you could be an atheist because you have bad experiences in the church. You can be an atheist because you just reject the concept of God, but you can't really be an atheist because you feel God has hurt you, and therefore now you're choosing not to believe in him. If I were to have a crime committed against me by someone, and I responded to that by not believing the perpetrator existed, that would make no sense. So I don't know. A lot of what Jordan Peterson says, if you just take 2 seconds to think about it, doesn't make any sense. But that in particular is just, the first one that comes to mind. I'm like, huh? So this is going to be a long episode of that. So I'll do my best not to, I will be judicious in my call out of kind of his absurdities, because if I did that, we'd be stopping every single sentence to try to make sense of his jargon, his mumbo jumbo that he's trying to put together, this kind of pedantry masked as intellectualism, as we'll see. So I'll leave it to that, because I definitely want to hear what Cade has to say, because he always has good ideas.
religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Correct.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses, where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible
It's
interpretation.
the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim
I'm
is
saying that we
he's
can't
good.
know, because we can't talk to those
Look,
authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
And we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said
Yeah.
I didn't say the. I
know.
said
That
right.
is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality.
Oh my God.
Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving
I don't
the
think
whole.
Peterson even knows what
Okay,
he's
is there a
saying.
problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear if the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No,
Is that-
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem
let's
with
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
I first want to point something out here, and it's that let me go back because I want to edit clips. And this is, one second. I first want to point out that Peterson's not really a Christian. I mean, you'll find out. You saw in the teaser, and you'll also find out when he's pressed on it more. He just doesn't identify as being a Christian. The people who were there, and I saw it. I know Kate, and you'll see Greg in a second. Were there under the guise that they were speaking with a Christian. You don't know in these episodes who the person is in the center until they walk out. So they were under the guise that they would be speaking with a Christian. Peterson doesn't even identify with the label of Christian. The original title of the video was 1 Christian versus 20 atheists, like they were under the impression that it would be, and then they changed the title of the video about like a few hours in when everyone was when they're getting so much pushback because Peterson won't even commit to the claim that he is in fact a Christian. So, Jubilee, what are we doing? Why are we casting people who don't even fit the labels that you're casting them as? Like what? That would be like casting me as what? Like a centrist? I don't know. Like I bet I guess maybe some people view me as like someone who's more moderate if they're much further left or something like that. So maybe some people consider Peterson a Christian, some people don't. But like I don't know. This whole episode was just really frustrating to watch because it's just Peterson will never take a definitive stance on anything. It's like he's defending the views of people who aren't there, and then when you challenge those views, he says, "Well, I'm not saying that. Those people are saying it." I'm like, "What?" So you're bringing up views, just trying to put them out there, and then you won't defend them when pressed on them. It's just exhausting with people like him who are just pseudo intellectuals who kind of try to muddy the waters with their jargon, and as you'll see, like just retreat back into this semantic fog, as Greg put it so eloquently, as you'll hear him say. So I don't know. This whole thing is just going to be basically an hour and a half, and at this rate, 3 hours. Usually that's how it goes. It's my commentary doubles the length of the video, but it's just it is very exhausting. So let's go on.
Sorry, you've been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do
rejecting
you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
He's going to say, I don't
I'm
know.
not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth where if you don't understand what you're rejecting,
Yeah, I don't agree with the guy who's arguing with Peterson here. I think Peterson, as much as it pains me to say, is right here, and to say that just because you don't know something doesn't necessarily mean you reject it. So, like, I'm trying to think of an example here. Like, very often if we're unaware of something, you can be agnostic on the question. Like, I don't know. So Peterson can very easily just say, I don't know whether Lono exists. So depending on how you define theism, because in my view, kind of agnosticism is a type of atheism, because theism is the belief in God. If you don't believe in God just because you aren't sure, like you're agnostic on the question, that still is a lack of belief in God, and thus you would be an atheist. But I think Peterson can toe this line like he usually does by saying that, look, I don't know about Lono. Like, I'm not gonna reject Lono. I simply don't know. And Peterson's right to go straight to the principle in question, which is, do you reject everything you don't have knowledge of? And this guy is not going to be able to pin him down on that, not because it's not necessarily true, because I think it is the case that we do lack belief in things that we are ignorant of. Like, why would you believe in some? If the burden of proof is on the person who believes something. So I don't believe in the god Lono, because I haven't been presented with any evidence that Lono does exist. the same thing with God. So, but this guy is kind of trying to go around that question. This is the issue with people who walk up to the chair with a flowchart. You know what I mean? With I need to ask this question and this question and this question and this question. It doesn't work because someone like Peterson will never fucking follow your flowchart. He's designed to confuse you. He's designed to muddy the waters, drag you down with him, and because that's how he exists, he's going to win every single time. So you got to be more adapting. You got to be more adaptive. You got to be able to like ask better questions and not stick with a line of questioning when Peterson will just like continue to chip away and reject it, especially if you don't have the requisite tools to break down what he's doing. Because to the average viewer, they're probably going to look at this and be like, Peterson's like, yeah, no, I don't reject everything I'm ignorant of. I just don't know. And if you're not able to go into that and be like, well, if you don't know something, you kind of are lacking a belief in it, and that would fit the definition of atheism, then this just seemingly is not going to go anywhere. But I'll let it go.
Rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I didn't
claim.
say that I rejected the belief in Lono.
Exactly.
I said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't. But let me get to my even greater point. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
This is true.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Oh my God.
Okay. You can.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
No.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right.
No, that's ridiculous. This is the problem with Jordan. Caring about deep matters doesn't make you religious. Okay? I don't know. Any more than, this is a bad example, any more than, enjoying making a certain type of food, like makes you, this is a bad example. I don't know where I'm going with this. Sorry, guys. I'm doing this on not as much sleep as I want. I don't, it's a terrible example. I guess instead of trying to make a comparison here, just because you believe in deep matters doesn't mean that you, or not believe, just because you care about deep matters and are oriented towards like understanding the truth of the universe or like the truth of things doesn't make you religious. Peterson is once again defining religion so broadly as to include things that no religious people really believe this. I think Cade was really onto something when he said that Peterson is defining religion so broadly in such a way that he could just turn around and define atheism very narrowly to say that atheists are people who, just genuinely hate religious people or genuinely hate, churches or like things like that. And of course, that's not a good definition of atheism. So Peterson's just being insanely obtuse here. So atheists know more about religion than religious people, therefore that makes them religious is a ridiculous statement to try to make. Of course not, because religion is not defined by caring about deep matters. You can be an atheist and care about deep matters. Like he's defining any sort of orientation in life, like wanting to do a certain thing or having desires as being religious. And that's so fundamentally untrue. So that's kind of all that I can say here. I think a better claim here, and this is what I think there's someone at the end, Xena goes up at the end and has a good claim, but another one would be like Jordan Peterson doesn't understand what Christians mean by God or something like that, which might even be her claim. I don't want to take it away, but like this is so obtuse.
They also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there.
Is that
You've been
true?
voted out by the majority.
Hold on. You just said most people in the United States deny that they're religious but acknowledge that they're spiritual? Is that even true? Let's look that up. Is the majority of the United States like Christian? Is religious. Take a look. 62% of adults identify as Christian. Unaffiliated is 28 to 31. Where are they getting this information? Not just are a majority of Americans religious, a majority of them, at least adults if we're talking about it, are Christian. what is Peterson talking about? A majority of individuals are the religion that he claims to be a representative, or doesn't claim, is supposed to be representing, but is not. It's ridiculous. Lying.
Aha!
Hey, there's Greg. Greg's great.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that, I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity
Well,
to
there
things.
can be.
In a sense, yeah, like in,
Well, no, but looking for something doesn't mean you necessarily believe that there is one. I mean, you can have a hypothesis and already have a premonition, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily exists. And also, there being something like the uniformity of nature doesn't presuppose a God. There's no. Once again, Peterson is defining God as order. And atheism or lack of God is disorder. And therefore, if you want order over disorder, you must be religious and you must believe in God, which is, it's just ridiculous. It's not, I don't know, it's really frustrating, frankly, because he's not using a definition. I'm not Christian, but I've already seen that there are many Christians who are angered by Peterson's performance because they feel like they're being represented by someone who, in their view, and understandably so, isn't even a Christian, who won't even identify as a Christian. So,
you mean like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles?
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like
he's
you're just
not.
kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All right.
you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
correspondence with reality.
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
Infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So all he's saying, I mean, what he's basically doing now is he's just throwing the skepticism card out there. He's just trying to say, well, how do you know your senses are true? How do you know? You could be fooled by Descartes' evil demon. You could be a brain in a vat. Yeah, all that's true, Jordan. Fine, maybe that's true. Like, what does this get at? Of course, we can never be 100% certain that our senses aren't lying to us, that Greg is in fact sitting across the table from Jordan Peterson, that I have a mic in front of me and I'm recording this video. Of course, all those things have a possibility of being false. But as Greg just said, inference is our best friend. Inference to the best explanation. What is the best explanation for the phenomena that we're experiencing right now? Of course, it's true. I have a light right here. It could be the case that there's tiny little gremlins with their tiny little pickaxes that are chipping away at the filament in the light and causing tiny sparks so fast, and that's what creates the light. And I can't even see them because they're smaller than the human eye, and I can't see them with a microscope. They can't be detected, yada, yada, yada. Or it works like a normal light with electrons going through the filament and lighting it up. True, it could be the first one. I can't disprove that it's the first one, but inference to the best explanation leads me to the conclusion that that is a normal functioning light. In the same way, just because we don't know for certain how the universe came into existence, how a lot of these, how something works, doesn't mean we have to posit a God. We can be uncertain, or we can infer to the best explanation. And very rarely, if ever, is the inference to the best explanation the God of the Christian Bible. Okay, that's why Peterson's not defending that, because it's very difficult to go from, wow, why'd this phenomenon happen? It must be a being that is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all good, that we really don't know that much about, has never actually shown himself, seems to be allergic to cameras or being recorded, and like it raises more questions than it answers. That's definitely the most parsimonious answer. Of course not. So this is a ridiculous line of questioning. You can be as sure, I'm as sure that things are true and false when I'm in the real world as I'm true that I trust my senses. Okay, of course they can be failing me, but I'm going to rely on them. Okay, like I don't know.
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Sure.
Is
How do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah.
Okay, before we get into that, because he does the whole thing there, he's kind of pulled the card of basically, if you don't believe in God, you don't have any ground to stand on in terms of resolving moral disagreement. This is just patently not true whatsoever at all. Atheists, just because they don't claim that there is a God that grounds morality, doesn't mean that we can't resolve moral disagreements or appeal to some sort of objective morality that's better for people. Like I think what religious people do, and it's weird that Jordan is bringing this up because he's not even claiming that he believes morality comes from God and objective morality comes from God. He's claiming that it comes from conscience. But in the same way people's consciences can disagree, even if conscience defines God, it doesn't seem to resolve the moral disagreement there like most Christians claim that it does. If one person believes in God, the other rejects God, well, God is objectively right, therefore the other person is wrong. It's incorrect, but at least I understand where that line of reasoning is going. I don't know how Jordan claiming this and then defining God as conscience, as he will in a second, really helps his case whatsoever at all. What I want to say specifically on that is religious people do not have a special access to morality that us atheists don't have. They simply do not. They have been lied to feel like they do. They are basically masking their own subjective opinions, their own opinions that they've come to from their, genetics and environment, like we all are socialized. And now they mask it behind this veil of objectivity. They claim that it's objective because their book says so, but it's okay, and like it doesn't. If I reject the book, you have no basis to tell me that like I'm wrong. He can be like, oh, you're wrong. My God says it. And I'm going to be like, okay, you're wrong. My God says it. Like there's no ground to stand on. The way that we resolve that disagreement is, as Greg was talking about, through reason, through conversation, through logical argument, through sometimes emotional appeals. That's what people are most receptive to. So what Jordan's bringing up here doesn't save him. It doesn't help him whatsoever at all. We don't get anywhere with that, especially for Jordan, because it's not, he's going to define God in a second by God of conscience. If you have a conscience, if you ever felt a right versus wrong. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but let's keep going.
Defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined it.
Okay, so as Elijah.
Oh my God. So this is my problem with Peterson. He brings up a definition that someone else said, and then when someone tries to attribute the definition to him because he should defend the claims he brings up, and if he uses people in support of claims he's making, which you would think someone would do in a debate, then you can be questioned on views you bring up. As soon as he's like, oh, well, I don't agree with the view, with what you're putting forward, he's like, well, I'm not putting it forward. Elijah put it forward. If you don't think it's helpful to your argument, then why are you bringing it up? Oh, by the way, this has no relation to the conversation. Here's this random definition of God I just thought was interesting and you should know. Huh? Oh, this is my problem with Peterson. It's so exhausting because he's so chronically bad faith or will not engage in any substantive conversation. He'll never take a position on anything. He'll never take a position on anything. He'll literally just spend the entire time critiquing your view and never take a view himself, because then you don't have anything of his to critique. It's hard to critique Jordan Peterson because what even is Jordan Peterson? Who is he? What does he believe in? Other than being an asshole, frankly, and being a conversational terrorist, okay? Just completely shutting down every single conversation by getting into this over definition thing. This is what people do when they don't have an argument or don't want to make an argument. They just try to define everything down to the minutia, to the point at which you can't have a substantive conversation. They drag you down into the mud, and then you spend all your time trying to get out of the mud, and you floundering, not being able to define the very precepts of reality, which gets far away from the debate at hand, to them, and sometimes their audience, if they also have two brain cells and live in their mom's basement, looks like you are struggling to answer, and therefore are being debunked. Liberal atheist debunked by Chad Jordan Peterson. When really Peterson's not making any claims and not actually putting forward anything substantive. So, yeah.
Defines God.
It's defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also defined it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way. And it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
Jordan can't even take a compliment. Greg's trying to be nice. I admire Greg for this so much. He tries to come across as likable. He tries to kind of use humor as a way to, get people to, be more sympathetic to what he's saying. And I admire it. But like Jordan is not even an emotionally evolved human being enough to take a compliment. Greg was like, hey man, you're knowledgeable. I know you know a lot. He's like, I'm not trying to be impressive and knowledgeable. I actually know. I don't even have to do a Jordan Peterson impression. I just go straight to Kermit and it works. I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm trying to really just get down and just like tell you about who's defining it in this way. It's so exhausting.
Right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or
we use the God that most fucking Christians believe in. The agentic, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God that intervenes in everyday life and is worthy of your worship, and if you don't believe in him, you're going to hell, and he wrote on stone 10 commandments that he sent down to Moses, and if you if you don't go to church, or if you don't believe in him, you're somehow damned to or you're subject to eternal damnation. He sent a flood to wipe out the whole world because people were bad. This is not a difficult question. It's only difficult if you're Jordan Peterson and you want to make it difficult because you don't want to take a position to defend. This is not difficult. I'm not operating off of some random definition. I'm operating off the definition that presumably 62% of Americans believe in. Okay? This is so exhausting when he won't even take a position on it. It's not difficult. We're not trying to adjudicate every single definition of God and say, well, if we can't determine whether God is this agentic, like, triomni being, or if it's God of conscience, or if it's God of empathy, or if it's God of just having any sort of aim in life, like, we're not trying to do that. You were a Christian, or at least the title said you were Christian, and everyone in that circle walked in there thinking they would be talking with someone who ascribed to the basic fundamental precepts of Christianity. And you don't. So this almost seems unfair and like intellectually disingenuous of both Jubilee and Jordan Peterson to have a debate like this, because these people, I mean, I don't like it. These people weren't like wronged seriously, but like they were not given informed consent in a very loose case. I don't want to use that because I don't want any connotations to anything else, but like they were not informed. They were blindsided. Okay? They told they were meeting a Christian, and then Jordan Peterson walks out. Like I don't know. It's really unfortunate, and I feel bad for some of the people there, because they're like, oh my God, like, how do I have a conversation? I thought I was having a conversation with a Christian. I wasn't having a conversation with someone who's just defending God as anything that anyone might view as order or like conscience or value. Like, it's exhausting.
Again, it goes back to my example of the Mona Lisa.
I'm defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
it's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the major Old Testament prophets.
All right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right.
So I don't know enough about this. I'd have to look back in the book. Then I guess Peterson would have to say that most Christians aren't Christian, or they're mistakenly Christian. I don't know enough about Elijah. I don't know enough about that. I would have to look specifically at how he's defining the God of conscience. Like, I don't know. Would it be like he's conscious of God or conscious of God? Like, I don't know. It seems, I mean, of course what he's saying is ridiculous, but it's like, I'm not sure. Like, Peterson then seems to be leveling the same critique against 62% of Americans who presumably believe in God as a triomni being, not as just a God of conscience. Like, it's, I don't know.
That is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
Thank you, Greg.
In what way?
Because, again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it.
No, that's ridiculous. I'm sorry. Jordan Peterson is intellectually disingenuous, but he's not a fucking idiot. Okay, he's a professor. He knows these things. Of course he knows how Greg's trying to define God. Of course he knows how most Christians define God. Of course he does. Of course he does. He's claiming ignorance to try to just make things more difficult and muddy the waters even more. That's so dishonest. Are you saying you don't understand, Jordan, how most Christians define God? This agentic triomni being that exists and hears your prayers and can perform miracles and has a divine plan and knows everything. Like, it's just exhausting.
The definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I don't care about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend to use these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of God.
point. You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
Nice
I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. It's very brave of you to do this.
Thank you.
What the heck does that mean? Was Jordan trying to pat himself on the back? It's very brave for you to come up and have a conversation with me because, I'm quite an annoying person and difficult person to really have a substantive dialogue. So I really, admire and think you're very brave for coming up. Jesus.
Surrounded is now a podcast.
I don't care.
Available where
Go away.
anytime.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
I actually agree with this claim. I don't really think they can directly be found.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
So it precedes science.
that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
I don't. So I'm sympathetic to Jordan's claim, and just in general, that you can't find morality within science simply because of the Izot gap. So everything that the guy on the right brought up regarding all of that, that can show us that there are patterns within humans, and that things that humans, or not even humans, I guess Neanderthals, previous creatures did do, but that doesn't say that they ought to do that. So even the most fundamental of things, you can't bridge the Izot gap with science. So you can't say, like, I don't know, like, specifically with like a scientific claim, like, I don't know, this is going to reduce human suffering. Okay, maybe it will. That's an is claim. It doesn't make the further claim that we ought to reduce human suffering. That is a valuative normative claim, and you can't get there with science. Science can tell you what is, it can't tell you what ought to be. It's to make a category error to want science to make a normative claims. So science can be very instrumental and useful in making moral claims, because a lot of moral claims rely on empirical and factual information, but it can't. So there has to be some sort of morality that exists outside of the scientific domain. Now, depending on how you define the scientific method, you could make an argument that moral reasoning is similar in kind to scientific reasoning because it has a level of precision. It should involve you revising statements or revising hypotheses or previous beliefs in the face of new evidence or new arguments. So there's a parallel structure in how I think they should operate. So I disagree with the last thing that Jordan said, that somehow like it has to exist outside of a scientific framework. I think much of the framework that is used within science and in terms of the critical reasoning skills can be applied to moral reasoning. But I don't, and it's just true, you can't get from a purely descriptive claim about how the world is to how the world ought to be. Science just can't make that jump. And to claim that it is to make a category error, is to have, like, can science tell us, you know, and not even science. Like, it's to try to have science make a claim that is designed not to make. It would be like saying, is a hurricane true or false? It's neither, because it's not the type of claim that has the ability to be true or false. Only propositions can be true or false. So to say that something is good or bad from the lens of like morality through science is to make a category error. But I don't think that means that there is no such thing as morality without some sort of higher level spiritual thing. Because a lot of people like to say, oh, you're a materialist, you're an atheist. They like to throw all the use them derogatorily. Therefore, there is no value. It doesn't matter. Whatever, anything goes. You know what I mean? Like, if it doesn't even matter what you do, which I just think is ridiculous. So Peterson isn't even defending that, but I don't really know exactly what his point even is, that like science has to exist within a moral framework. Sure, because I guess people have to act on right and wrong in order to do science, I guess. I don't know.
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated,
doesn't
by
need to derive
pointing
from the
to
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact that
hang on a sec.
we are social animals, so we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that
my
works.
point.
Science explains it. So you
No,
just,
science doesn't explain morality.
Well, they could have derived it from science. I mean, they could have derived it from a process similar to the scientific method. The problem is they'd have to have a normative underlying assumption, which is that survival is good, that we ought to do things that maximize the survival of the species. That would be the fundamental precept, and they'd have to go from there. So science can get us to that claim. But if it was a generally agreed upon belief in that group that that's what they should do, then they could use something like the scientific method. Okay, interesting. When we eat all these berries that are poisonous, people die. Ergo, therefore, don't eat the berries. You have an observation, people are dying. Hypothesis, it's the berries. Experiment, people keep eating the berries. Results, don't eat the berries. Like that is a scientific claim in nature in terms of like utilizing a scientific method. You just can't utilize the scientific method to get to the claims that people dying from eating berries is like morally bad, or we ought not do that. So I disagree with both of them here.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
But we see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
This is true.
Okay,
This
so
is
you're
true.
asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be.
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future, or not,
Not
predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody, and so
Hunting
actually,
animals.
no. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but
let's
they can
pause here.
perceive the future.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank you, man.
Good man. Yeah.
All right, interesting conversation.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How you
How
doing?
are you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
That's true.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act.
Correct.
And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume
Yeah.
about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specific.
Partially true, partially false. Like it's absolutely true that science is not value free. I'm very glad Jordan Peterson acknowledges that. A lot of conservatives are like science is objective. I mean, kind of. I mean, also then these are the same people who reject the science regarding vaccines and all that sort of thing. So I'm like climate change. So, but like there is this underlying notion that science is objective. It's insulated from like morality, and it doesn't matter, and it can't be affected by humans in the same way, and that's just not true. But that doesn't mean that there can't be objective truths that come from science that are somewhat value-free, at least in terms of like, I don't know, like the speed of light. You know what I mean? Like we discovered the speed of light. That's not contingent on like maybe the process to discovering the speed of light might have been immoral if people were excluded from that process, if people were exploited in order to get those measurements. But that doesn't mean that it itself is like, either subjective or like laden with value. So I don't know. I agree in part by what Peterson is saying, but I once again, he then, as I'm glad Luke pointed this out, the kind of reverse of this claim, or what Peterson's trying to get to, is they are found in religion, and then he's defining religion as any category or anything that involves purpose or morality or order or value. And that's once again the issue. He's defining morality or religion as anything outside of that, which is just, it's ridiculous. I guess all music then, and all music that's moving would be religious because it has some sort of emotional appeal that can't necessarily be explained in terms of pure numbers. largely. Like I don't know.
Pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
That's people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me myself, I am a former.
Okay, so you see this later. He doesn't get into it. Why doesn't he discuss publicly whether he's a Christian? He's supposed to be a Christian right now here, but he won't even admit to whether he is or considers himself to be a Christian. This is what I mean when he's so intellectually dishonest. He's not being an honest interlocutor. Yeah, if you wanted to say that, yeah, a lot of other people don't believe I'm a Christian because I believe in a very loose definition of God, but I would consider myself a Christian. That is an honest claim. Not claiming that you won't even discuss, and you'll see later, he won't even, he says to Danny in a bit, I don't want to spoil too much, but it wasn't the first part of it. He's like, I don't have to tell you whether I'm a Christian or not. I'm sorry, you're there to discuss it. It's just exhausting.
Young Earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel.
Oh, wow. So you can just use words like young Earth creationist, and Peterson's obviously smart enough to understand what that means. But when someone says merely just the concept of God as the tri-omni being, Peterson throws a fit and just completely is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's ridiculous. Of course, Peterson is not an idiot. Okay, I disagree with probably a majority of the things he espouses, but he's not a dumbass. Okay, so he clearly knows these things. He just plays dumb when it suits him, and he can drag things out into this just murky territory where he doesn't have to claim a position, and everything looks just too complicated to see that Peterson genuinely just has no idea how to argue in favor of Christianity, because he's not. It's just exhausting.
Directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery's wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the
that's
Bible
very
predicate
different.
and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave?
Oh no, that is very disingenuous on Jordan's part. What Moses does is he leads the Israelites out of Canaan in order to take them out because they are God's chosen people. It's not because slavery is wrong that Moses is doing it. It's because it's God's chosen people that are being oppressed and enslaved, not the practice of slavery itself. And Luke is correct in claiming that in other aspects of the Bible, God does, or not God, because the Bible does teach you and tell you how to treat a slave, that it's not wrong if you maim a slave or you injure a slave, but not so much that it kills the slave. No. So Peterson's being intentionally obtuse here, and assuming that Luke's not going to point it out, which unfortunately I don't think that he does.
Isn't
Well,
that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Those were Enlightenment ideals. Those were not Christian ideals. They were not whatsoever at all. They hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator, so they do invoke religion there. But they're not inherently religious principles, because inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that Jefferson wrote in the Declaration was derived from John Locke and his treatise on government, which was an Enlightenment text pushing back against religion. So no, the Western society was not inherently founded upon religion and Judeo-Christian values. Give me one Judeo-Christian value that is unique to Judaism or Christianity and didn't exist before. They don't exist. Everything like thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery are just other principles that were adopted by people before, or they're just universal human principles that aren't inherently Christian or aren't inherently Judaic. They aren't. These are not religious principles. They are principles that have existed, and religion and people came along and claimed them as their own. People, Western civilization is founded on that, claiming things that are others as their own, if you're unaware. So, not surprising that Jordan would like to make a claim like that.
So slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery.
And wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution?
Just because religious people are ones who advocate sometimes in favor of positive social change doesn't mean that the change was driven by religion. In many cases, it was driven not by religion. It was driven by a rejection of certain religious teachings. This is the problem with religious people, is they love to claim all of the goods of religion, but like to deny all of the consequences. So though they love to talk about, oh my God, the church was at the forefront of the abolition movement for slavery, as well as the civil rights movement, completely obfuscating the fact that the church and many within the church existed on the opposite side of that and greatly pushed back against the abolition of slavery and desegregation. So this is the problem. They like to claim all the credit and take none of the blame. And it's the same thing with God. They attribute everything good that happens to God, but anything bad that happens, oh, that's just humans, you know? So it's ridiculous.
Of humans in general, rather than just Christianity.
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution of
What do you mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
That's not what you
humans-
said. Humans
based
just
on
editing.
culture
No.
and history, right? We get better.
Do we see how do you see how not human? Do you see how Peterson either intentionally misunderstood that or is such an idiot that he wasn't even listening? He was saying this is just humans editing this, and Peterson interpreted that to mean just humans, like humans that are being just, adhering to justice. God, he's so disingenuous. You could even tell with the inflection in his voice that he wasn't using. He was like, these are just humans. Would be the claim that these are humans that are just. But saying, these are just humans who are doing this. That means that you're using the word just not as a verb for justice or not as a modifier of justice, but instead denoting that there are certain humans that are doing this. And Peterson, once again, is intentionally misunderstanding that to serve his point and derail the conversation into the semantic fog where he can drag his opponent down into. And because Peterson has so much experience being a pedantic asshole, he almost wins always in that domain.
They did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the Bible. Based on the Bible. They looked at it and they justified it in the United States and the Deep South. They justified slavery.
Yeah, but the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently against slavery, and it was about the only movement in the history of the human race.
Do you see now he's defending just Protestantism? Mind you, he's just talking about just Protestantism. I'm sorry, Jordan, what do Protestants believe in terms of whether or not there is a God and whether or not there is a triomni God? They believe in the God of the Bible. They believe in a God that is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good. So why he's now claiming he's talking about a specific sect of Christianity that has this view of what God is. And then when someone else says, you know what I'm talking about when we're talking about God, Peterson's like, I have no idea. This is the intellectual disingenuity of someone like Jordan Peterson. It is. It's really like infuriating almost just watching him be so intellectually dishonest and never stake down any claims. But clearly he knows what people are talking about and he'll bring it up when it suits him, but doesn't play along when it could make the conversation actually be more substantive, because then he would get nailed down on the fact that he's not even a Christian, which comes up later, which is pretty ridiculous.
Had an anti-slavery direction,
which was driven by humans and their understanding
that's one
of
way
morality.
of looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay, fine.
So with women's suffrage as well
as
a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Enlightenment.
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So the
Enlightenment
idea
reasoning.
of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences as humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's something that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and
of...
just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave-owning, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity...
You also can't
decided
credit it to the
address
Bible
that
either.
first.
What, about
all
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say
blaming it
it
on the
bolstered
Bible.
it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
Based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible,
It was the Protestant Christians
which evolves over time.
Let's pause there.
It's a good
You've
point.
been voted out by the majority.
All right. Well, it was great talking
Yeah,
with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you, too.
Yes.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Oh my God, that's not... Answer the question, Jordan. That's one way of defining it. Is that the one you're defending? Here's the problem. He's not defending anything. You could say that. I'm not asking what I could say. I'm asking what you would say. Oh, I would crash out. I would crash out. I was almost cast in this episode. Spoiler, a little bit of spoiler. Just didn't work out in terms of timing. I swear I probably would have crashed out. I can't deal with this level of like intellectual disingenuity and like not engaging in good faith. Like it is exhausting.
Right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
No.
Okay, if there is a God, what is...
God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. Is all he's saying is if there is anything such that objective morality exists, it must be God, and God must ground that. And that is a very false claim. We can get to objective morality in many different ways. Everything isn't just purely subjective without God. You can make empirical claims that are objective, at least an objective insofar as you are sure of them with your senses. And you can make the same claim about morality in the sense of, I intuitively trust my senses. And my senses tell me that there's a microphone in front of me right now. My senses tell me that murder is wrong. And, so if I'm going to trust my sensory experience because intuitionally it makes the most sense, inference to the best explanation says that morality is wrong. Same style of reasoning. Now, the problem is people don't like it because it's not as clear cut as this is right, this is wrong. But that's just not, or like we're 100% certain on those two things. And that's just, we just really can't get that. That's not something that can necessarily be found. So, yeah.
the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell?
Yes, that's a good way of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand? So here's the deal.
At
we
minimum,
can get
it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite...
of endless suffering. How about that?
And so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth without God, avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise...
And when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist, it really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God,
It's more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If you define your benefit,
if it's going to come at your expense, would you still
Define
follow
your
it?
expense.
If God
Oh my
came down
God.
and said, "Here is my moral code, and you should follow it," but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell. Are you going to follow it?
well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ.
Answer the question,
Right?
Jordan.
Because they
Okay,
were
but-
Oh my God, don't say what other people bring up. He asked you a question, not what other people in the Bible responded to that question. Oh my God. Jordan Peterson is literally a meme of himself.
Hang on, I'm answering your question.
You're not
They
answering the
were
question.
they were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with
Yeah.
the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not well.
yes,
let's
they
define.
did. Yes,
hang
they
on,
did.
hang on.
If-
Let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
So
what do you mean by you?
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then between a definition and
You're
a
justifying a
justification? I mean, it's
definition.
ultimately
No, I see.
psychologically
You're defining
the same
something
thing.
to justify
Well,
it.
we have to define what we're talking about before we can debate.
Okay, well,
right?
so
And
here's my
I
position.
said that God, among other things,
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with
So first off, hold on.
certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position. Now,
All that means is that you are an agnostic atheist. You're still an atheist. Now, of course, he's saying he's a non-theist. That's ridiculous. Gnosticism is the belief, or whether or not you think there can be certainty in whether God exists or not. So agnostics believe it. We could be wrong. You know what I mean? It's a sense of doubt. Gnostics are like, no, I 100% for certain know there's a God, or 100% know for certain there isn't a God. Both those people are equally ridiculous. Okay. Both fundamentalists in their own regard. They're dogmatic in either believing God exists or doesn't. The other half of the coin is agnostics, which say that, hey, there is room for error here. We could be wrong, but based on the evidence available, I either do or do not believe in God. So I would be an agnostic atheist. This guy also is describing himself as an agnostic atheist, even if he doesn't have the words to describe it. So you don't have to be certain whether God exists or not, or think it is a question that can be known with certainty. It's just whether or not theism is the belief in God. Atheism is the lack of belief in God. So if upon the preponderance of evidence, if that's the standard you want to use, you think that, yeah, it's probably more likely there isn't a God or that there is a God, then that determines whether you're a theist or an atheist, not whether you think with certainty that we can know whether there's a God or not. That's a separate question from the question of whether you believe in God. Unless you think belief requires certainty, and in no other domain does that actually exist. We don't use the term belief or knowing with certainty in any context. I believe that the world around me exists. Do I know that with 100% certainty? No. Would I say I know that there is an external world? Maybe not, because that's a very philosophical question in nature. But if someone were to ask me if I know that I have a dentist appointment at 4 p.m., I don't. But let's just say I did. I would say, yeah, I do. Could it be false? Could I, could I technically not have an appointment and it's been rescheduled? Yes. I would still say I know. So like, it is dishonest to be like, requires certainty in order to consider yourself an atheist. That is much too high a bar. And I also wouldn't make that claim about theists either. I wouldn't claim that, oh, how can you be a God if you don't know with 100% certainty whether God exists? Of course not. It's just based on the preponderance of evidence, based on what you believe is most likely true. Do you believe in God or do you not believe in God? So I just wanted to correct that.
with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you
And
come to
what I
that
ought to
conclusion?
do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I
definition
reject
of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a
don't think he's
vacuum.
saying that,
Nothing
though.
exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a
and
hierarchical
that is what
structure?
the quantum
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
are. Some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What
let's
is
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
All right. Here we go. Here's
How you
Parker.
doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist,
There we
I
go.
don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists.
There we go.
And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Do you think?
Sure, so do you
Hold
believe
on. Cardinal Newman was also, he had a quote about how it would be better for all of the heavens to fall and all of the, society to go extinct before one human tell a lie or one person commit a single sin. So, like, I don't know. I don't know enough about Cardinal Newman. Are we saying that Cardinal Newman didn't believe in the agentic, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God? I'm pretty sure he did. So just because maybe he defined God or used, I don't even know the quote. I'm sure that Cardinal Newman used the word God and conscience in the same sentence once, and now Jordan is bringing it up as if Cardinal Newman is claiming that conscience is the necessary and sufficient condition for God, which I really, really don't think is the case. I mean, I could do some quick Google searching here. I don't really want to derail us too much, but like, do you really think someone like Jordan Peterson could get high up in the Catholic Church? Really? With this type of ambiguity? Someone who won't commit to believing in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God? No, of course not. So of course someone like Cardinal Newman didn't. Cardinal Newman was also just off his rocker. So, I don't know.
in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
Hold on, I want to...
What do you mean by
Oh, this
believe?
is like a viral moment. I want to back up.
Influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure, so do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Oh my God.
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition.
not.
What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say
circular?
you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said
So that's not true. It's also not a circular definition. A circular definition is when you use the word to define a word. So it's probably going to be an example that many people on the left might not like, but I'm going to bring it up because it's not a good definition. Defining a woman as someone who identifies as a woman is in fact a circular definition. It doesn't get us anywhere, and it doesn't provide any additional content because you have to know what a woman is in order to understand the definition. That's equivalent to me saying a blarg is someone who identifies as a blarg. You don't know what a blarg is, so I haven't helped you. That is not what Parker brought up. Is not a circular definition. What do you mean by believe and saying think it to be true? That is a furtherance. And also Jordan knows what believe means. Like, you know what, like, this is just such a, once again, so disingenuous. Do you believe in God? Depends what you mean by believe. Depends what you mean by is. Depends what you mean by God. It's like, oh, I don't, it's just exhausting.
think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a belief?
believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it.
Okay, Batman.
That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
What the fuck is he talking about?
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life?
be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical
What do you mean
practice.
save your career?
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
That's not the question.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have
asking?
done everything I bloody well could so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's
What
a
do you mean?
hypothetical and it's
Yeah,
not
Answer
answerable.
answer
hypotheticals?
it.
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
He's been
Did you
caught.
eat
don't
today?
play games.
He's
I'm
been
not playing
caught.
I'm just asking
Yes,
if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner,
do you
you're
mean?
playing game.
That's not
I
a-
just told
there's
you
no context.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the
what if
time
you
you've
are?
got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Let's think about that. Is that true? Look, can we, one sec. Can we be serious about that?
There, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Can we think about that though? Like, can we seriously consider that? Peterson is saying that if you're hiding Jews in your attic, you've committed so many things that lead to sin. Really? Really? Hiding Jewish people? What is it? Meep Geese, the person who, the woman who hid Anne Frank's family in her attic. Apparently, she did so many things that led to sin, right? What is Jordan even talking about? The problem is Jordan made a ridiculous claim that you have to die for your beliefs to believe anything. And now he's realizing the ridiculous implications of it and is being intentionally obtuse and rejecting the question, even though it's a totally fair one. I mean, this murderer at the door scenario is something that's brought up as a counterexample to Kant's categorical imperative. The idea that one not ought lie because if that were a universal maxim upon which everyone acted and which everyone lied, it would logically fall apart. If it then is immoral and always is immoral to lie, if an axe murderer comes to your door asking for where your friend is and your friend is in the house, but you could lie to save his life, would you? Kant still says no, you shouldn't lie. But Peterson, because he's less intellectually honest than even someone like Immanuel Kant, refuses to engage because he knows his whole argument is going to fall apart because he was being sloppy. So, yeah.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
No, it's a
Give
good
up
line
on
of question.
just like trying to clarify your position? Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask
It's
you.
just a basic hypothetical
Like,
where,
Yeah, it
where
is.
you're,
Like,
you
if you-
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany.
It happened.
That's just a basic
It happened in
obviously you would
history.
lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking,
Answer the
just clarifying.
question.
But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not
you
what truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
He's not answering.
Obviously, because I care about
You're-
truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Why, how do
Obviously,
you know that?
right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity. with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly
without
that's not
the
what you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were
said-
not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How's
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Yeah. My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Here we go. All right, we're almost halfway through.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with defining terms.
Yeah.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I suppose. Right. At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the bottom is God, and
That's a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God, and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying...
So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game. So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining characteristics that can be applied to these types of foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily.
Right.
So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony, right?
Yeah, that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking, because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right, so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Yes, you do.
So
You
I
mean
mean-
independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or
Sure.
more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay.
wow.
I completely
Peterson,
agree.
the consequentialist.
So, in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
Or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be incongruent.
Oh, right, okay.
Hang
It
on
is
a-
God.
That's right.
Sorry,
That's right.
I
That's
corrected
good. That's
myself.
great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes, like that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
That's a good question.
yes.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
I don't
Okay,
think-
so
no.
someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they just...
I know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole
He's a little
society
too,
where that happens a lot.
little too
by the
convincing
way.
when he does
And that's
something like
also
that.
how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people.
Right.
Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can
Right.
definitely say it that
Thank
way.
you.
That's exactly right. And
Right.
navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
The Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example.
Yeah.
And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
They're
So is that
addressing
person
the
Christian,
same-
though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because
Exactly.
they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right? So,
Christianity.
so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like
8/12
that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
well,
don't
I
understand.
hesitate to do that personally because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same, right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see.
Why in boxes?
Like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
It was good. She's very smart. Very, very smart.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you
Let's
doing?
go, Danny. Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you
Catholic.
can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me.
This is ridiculous. He's in a debate and he refuses to say that he is a Christian. What are we doing? I don't have to tell you? But why are we being so childish? It's ridiculous.
I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
There we go. Wow. That was short
there.
but sweet.
Hi, nice
What's
to
your
meet you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
That's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
the
those
higher
things.
it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
and it's partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your wife.
Yes, I love her. So I prioritize and I sacrifice for her.
Right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage.
I mean, I'm married to my wife because I love her. That's also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. Right. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying
making
to
that
make
claim?
a definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right.
Okay.
So even the small things. I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end. That's the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So
this is kind of a, let me go back. This is kind of a trivial point, but is it really? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like, I'm just thinking out loud right now, but like if you want to have sex with someone on the first date, would you not want to treat them in such a way that like makes them feel safe, makes them feel secure, makes them feel, you know, like that they're being paid attention to? And that's the same thing you'd kind of want to do if you want to pursue a long-term relationship with someone, right? Like, I guess maybe your aims would be, your aim would definitely be different, and I guess presuming you're not like lying to them saying that you want a long-term relationship even when you don't. It seems like, I don't know. I feel like they can be kind of similar. Like, obviously there can be some differences, and I guess that's what he's getting at, but it seems like some behavioral patterns, at least in terms of if you're taking someone on a date, can overlap, most certainly. And they can result in, you know, if you treat someone well, if you show care and attentiveness to them, I have to imagine they'll be maybe more likely to want to have sex with you if they feel you're a good person and they feel that you know you care about them, and they might also want to be in a relationship with you. So they might have a little bit more overlap than Jordan is intentionally suggesting there is.
Wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying worship is almost a spectrum, right? It's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of like that's a good question.
When
it's
when is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
The closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
how
worship.
close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love? I'm trying to define something. What do you mean worship? Well, I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you.
So do you have that attitude towards your wife?
I have that attitude.
Do you privilege her compared to other women?
Of course I privilege her compared to other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over any other human, but I don't think that she is some
You're making the assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're either going in many directions, or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you'd worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship, right? I prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said that the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the closer
you get...
How
close? Can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
Do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is it? So it's just an opinion that Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on opinion.
Well, just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true.
Let me ask you.
Damn straight, Jordan.
Well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald better than Ernest Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine does.
Good. Well,
so it's about purpose and definitions.
Sure. Let me give you an analog then.
Okay.
The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
No. So
and maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
it depends on what you're seeking for.
So it is subjective.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and
Well,
I want to know.
if you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And
There's no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then you...
Okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because you just said they
the
can't
mere
be.
fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. What's your evidence?
Are you denying that there are?
How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness?
How do you measure worship? Here's the problem with Jordan. Here's the problem: is he's saying, "Oh my God, you can't quantify that nihilists are happy. What is happiness? You know, how do you know that they're really nihilist?" He just flipped the same thing on him, and is like, "How do you know whether it's worship? Like, what do you like? Of course, there's a gradient. Of course, it's a spectrum. You don't have to know exactly the level. But is he denying that there's at least one person who says they're a nihilist, who is happy? Is he denying that there are nihilists, or is he denying that anyone who is happy cannot be a nihilist? Like, what?
And how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact.
Wow, interesting. Very fascinating that people who are deluded into thinking that there is, some higher power being that has control over everything, it gives them some solitude. Yeah, that's not shocking. Ignorance is bliss. Okay, it's the same reason conservatives are on average happier than liberals. It's because when you're not burdened down and know the truth of the world and how fucked up things are and think everything is going to be fine and okay because a divine being is looking over you, then yeah, you're going to be happier. Okay, I would rather know the truth than be deluded into happiness. Like, what is the goal? Is the goal to just be deluded into being happy? No, of course not. Absolutely not. It's a ridiculous claim. Like, okay, cool. Maybe religious people are happier on average. Okay, that doesn't mean that they're more in line with the truth, or that I would want to be happy if it would involve things that aren't true. It seems like there are things that are more important than just mere truth or mere happiness. Sorry, the truth may matter more than just happiness.
In psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned.
Just answer
it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. Okay. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened, because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
What makes them false gods, though? One sec, can we think about that? What makes totalitarian gods false gods under Jordan's framework? If that's who they prioritize, it might be a better or worse god, but it's still a god, right? I mean, by false god, does he mean like less good in terms of aim? It's a terrible definition.
Because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or devoted believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does happen. But it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan, yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good.
All right. Good luck.
My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
It's not Christian morality. It's morality that Christians have co-opted from others and stolen.
Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So,
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics, that's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
that's what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
Yeah, but not
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right.
Is this a situation?
But this one certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not. Look, the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time, that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief.
What is he even
That's
saying?
a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great and all, like
I think
the
it's a
great-making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So,
Okay,
so
so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a
change?
sec.
Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth.
does
That's one.
No,
that's
it's
totally
not.
fine, but
No. You don't get to skate over
because
that
this is a
with
straw
that's
man.
totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In
the
what way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a
find
sec.
one maxim
What is it?
that's transcendent
What is it?
across situations.
I didn't
and
say
I
any
just
of those
It's not.
words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation you're
rephrase.
a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean
Ooh.
it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Get the
Okay.
eyebrows.
Okay.
Do I have the eyebrows right?
Rephrase your question,
Yeah,
so
sure.
because I
Sure.
must have missed it. I
So-
tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our
we can only, yeah, well, we can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
It would know how to do so.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the...
Yes, because if it's a perfect being, then presumably it would know perfectly how to communicate its message to these beings in a way that they would understand it. This is not that difficult.
Phenomena itself.
So,
like, for example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand like
free will.
thousands of years in the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
wait a sec. Let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't
incoherent.
God... Well,
it's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you. But
Yeah, and 1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you are going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you want to
tried
respond
to
to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
like
your
I said,
view,
if you want to have it fail, no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more clearly so that someone like me can understand it.
More clear than anything Jordan's been saying this whole time.
God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world
doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
How we argue against
That's
it.
not the case.
You've been voted out
Have
by
it
the
your way
majority.
instead of arguing against the point is crazy. Oh my God.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm
Good.
surrounded by atheists.
My question to you, let me scoot in.
I thought we're more religious,
would be,
actually.
what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Aim up?
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that
What does this mean?
I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian
Yeah, but it'll
morality
come
is.
in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different like disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. Eh? I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Like, wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt
That dude had
he
great
was
hair.
the god of attention.
Back there.
Right, and
Great.
the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, like a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system, and I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures
taking
our
notes.
culture,
What a
for example.
scholar.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
That's a good start,
Right.
because I would say that actually constitutes belief. Like you said, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay,
Yeah.
he regards that inspiration as God.
Okay.
Right, and when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists
Correct.
not understanding.
But have
what
you
they're
taken
rejecting.
inspiration from?
That's ridiculous. Saying anything you take inspiration from, you therefore believe in. No, that it's just such a ridiculous claim. If I go to one sermon or one like Buddhist, I guess service or whatever they do, and I really something resonates with me, that means I automatically believe in Buddhism. No, of course not. You can take inspiration from stuff and not believe in it all the time. It's a reductive view once again. Once again, these principles aren't Christian. You're saying that you have to show me something. Even for this argument to work, you'd have to show me something in the Bible that is essentially Christian, that was never thought up before and was never brought up in any other context. And you can't, because all the things, 10 commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself, all those sorts of things, give unto others what they give unto you. Like, that sort of thing is completely not essential to Christianity. Those were way longer. Like, it was the ancient Egyptians who had many of those ideas. None of it is essentially Christian. These are universal human principles. Christians, once again, are just co-opting something and taking something that was someone else's and making it their own, which is not surprising considering the tight knit between Christian mission trips and colonization. So, interesting.
Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say. And then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity.
Thank you. They don't.
Because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that
Correct.
you can very closely tie
they're not Christian morality.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
Right.
I
So
don't
it's
think
not
the
Christian
Christian
morality.
claim is exactly that they originate Christianity.
So if I'm
right?
living those
So
values,
it's not Christianity.
How is it that I'm living the Christian values and
Thank
maybe
you.
not the Egyptian values or something?
Yeah, there we go.
Something else.
Well,
that you
one
brought
of
up.
one of
Pause there.
Oh.
You've been voted out by
that was good. That was good. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello there.
This fake
How you
running
doing?
is funny.
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this like Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with like the idea of like the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture, and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well,
your
I
opinions.
can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's true.
sectarian belief
Christian
than
who
something
doesn't
that's
concern
central
himself
to
with the rapture
Christianity.
is
Now,
fine.
there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that.
Correct.
That doesn't have anything to do with me. You asked a more deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about you
question?
know that you put yourself there?
Oh my
Do you
God.
think is sin like a part of
So
Christian morality?
dramatic.
What do,
Do
what do
you?
you mean exactly? Sin as
Like
a part.
the
It's missing
concept
the
of sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target, right? And so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target, and that you.
One second. If we think about that, though, if sin is about missing the target, the concept of original sin completely goes against that, because according to Christians, we're all born into original sin. Like, Jesus died for our sins, but we didn't do anything. But, like, by virtue of existing, we are sinful. How can we miss the target by existing? Because we're not perfect? Then that doesn't seem like a personal moral failing that I can be held accountable for if I'm less than perfect, yet I was created that way. Like, the whole idea of Christianity and religion is just littered with absurdities and contradictions that render it laughable, frankly. Like, I don't know. I won't go into another rant against religion, but like, it's crazy how much influence it has. Like, frankly, if someone believes in the triomni version of God and not the God that Peterson is trying to obfuscate from and, you know, defend by having it be so vague you can't really pin it down, the actual triomni God who like listens to your prayers and is able to intervene in everyday life, like, I'm sorry, like, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. Okay, like, we need to stop pretending like these things are like just not ridiculous. Like, if you believe in that, I'm sorry, you're an adult who believes in Santa Claus. Like, that's fine, you can do that, but I'm going to treat you with the same legitimacy in terms of your belief as an adult who believes in Santa Claus, or as someone who believes in dragons, or as someone who believes in the flying spaghetti monster. Like, you're just wrong. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, that's just, no, that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, you think it does. It doesn't. And I'm not going to base my entire moral system off of your delusions. Absolutely not. And I'm certain as hell not going to let you try to take away the rights of others, because a book that was written 2,000 years ago by many different authors, that's why it contradicts so much. It's because it was written by a lot of different people. And you claim it's infallible and divine, says that we should take people's rights away, but it was probably a mistranslation considering it's been shifted so many times and translated into many different languages. Like, I'm sorry. No. Nope. I want no part of that. You can believe whatever delusions you want. You're not going to indulge me in them, and I'm not going to let you force others to believe or live according to your delusional book. That simple.
Miss it in many ways, and the consequence of that will be your life will be ridden with anxiety, your life will be pointless, people will turn against you.
Don't believe in sin at all?
Well, do you believe in error? Have you made any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the idea
that's a Christian belief.
No, it's
the
not.
idea of hell, I don't believe
No, that's
in
also
it
a Christian belief, by the way.
That there's no
a
such
Christian
thing as
belief
hell?
is hell?
No, that there's no sin that, well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But there's a Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't believe in that? Like I think that when you, can I explain a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised by. And so there are certain things that lead you down a dangerous path. And once you are dead, I think you're kind of removed of that person. There's no there are no factors of the earth that have to.
What happens after death.
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you've suffered terribly in ways that you thought would never end, do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say that there was a part that I played in that.
Okay,
but
that's the thing to find out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe in, somewhat of free will, that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors. And so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences of that.
Like I said, I can't address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done in the past that weren't good?
I think that you can.
Okay. Then that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian doctrine?
You believe
you would go to hell for those things?
You believe you can?
In order for something to be Christian doctrine and uniquely Christian doctrine, it has to be just that, uniquely Christian. Me just being kind to people and believing you shouldn't murder people and you shouldn't cheat on your wife and you should do those things isn't Christian morality. I mean, fundamentally, I reject the aspects of the Ten Commandments that are uniquely Christian. I am the Lord thy God, you shall have no gods before me. I reject that. So I actually do reject Christian morality because it is immoral, according to Christianity, to place any gods or believe in any god other than the God of the Christian Bible. Okay, so I reject that. So just because I accept other aspects of it that aren't uniquely Christian doesn't mean I accept Christian morality. You don't get to take credit for universal human principles that have been around millions of years and will continue to be around for millions more years. Maybe hundreds of thousands if we want to tie it to humans, but you get my point.
Improve.
Yeah.
Right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that.
This is not Christian.
Yeah. Those are all Christian presuppositions.
They're not.
I guess
they're not unique. They're not uniquely Christian. You don't get to just declare that something was said in your book and therefore it's yours. Okay? That would be like me right now. I'm going to create a religion called Oliverism, and it says you shouldn't murder. And if someone's like lives in accordance with it, I'm like, well, that's an Oliveristic principle. You're in adherence with Oliveristic morality. No, that's not how it works. It's not unique to Christianity. Okay? You don't get to claim it. It's not yours. Just because you wrote it down and said it's yours doesn't make it so. This is not Christian morality. Most aspects of Christianity and most aspects of morality that are unique to Christianity, I in fact reject. Like I said before, okay? I don't believe that that there is one Lord thy God and I shall not worship no gods other than thee, which is the first of the 10 commandments. So, no.
Different opinions of what Christian morality is.
Yes, sounds
so
like it.
I think that my opinion of Christian morality is something that I don't really agree with, and maybe you would define that as like the foundations of Christianity.
Let me give you an example. So if you want to atone, which means to unify yourself and unify that with the world, then the first thing you have to do is figure out what you did wrong and admit it. That's a confession.
Not
that was
uniquely
good.
Christian.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
Hey, well, hello again.
Hi there.
My claim is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible, I don't see, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it exists all throughout time, culturally. And the way that you define meta-truth, I don't see a distinction between that and like a metaphor.
Hold on, can I point out an issue I have with the prompt, Zena's prompt? Nothing against her, she's awesome. An issue is that there is no such thing as the Bible intending something, because the Bible was likely not written by a singular author, almost certainly. So like maybe you could say the authors of the Bible intended plurally. This might be a semantics or pedantic rather critique, but I don't think the Bible can really intend things, and I don't think that the authors of the Bible can intend things, because I think they were very different in terms of the things that they wrote, clearly. So I'll be curious to hear more about this, obviously. I mean, I watched it like a few weeks ago, so I have a general understanding of how it goes, but I don't think in general that the Bible can intend things, or the authors, because they're so different.
Right? But and you also said that you cannot say whether this story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
So that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say? By their fruits you'll know them.
Okay.
Right. Well, so one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing. Right. And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting, because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be.
Okay, but that can still be the wrong interpretation. This has no bearing on whether it's the correct interpretation. If the Bible had an interpretation of a certain nature, let's say it was a bad interpretation even, let's say for sake of argument, and I know it's contested, that the Bible in fact does condemn homosexuality. Let's say it does, it says it in many places, they're, mistranslation, this and that, I don't really care, I think it's a bad book, we should throw it out. Regardless, let's say that it did, for sake of argument. It condemns homosexuality. Then a progressive Christian comes along, obviously uses that doctrine to have people feel included, have gay people feel included. That's still not what the Bible intended. And if the Bible is false, and someone instead is using the Bible in a different way for good, that's fine, but it does mean that the original text is not being used as it is intended, and if it's a bad original intent, I think we should just throw it out. So it doesn't matter that a lot of people appreciate Peterson's interpretations. If his interpretations are wrong, it doesn't matter how useful they are, they're still wrong, and not the ones that the Bible intended. So the claim here is that his framework for understanding is not the ones that the authors of the Bible, if we can even ascribe them as a monolith, intended. But the problem with that is that it's just not true. It doesn't matter. It has no bearing on whether it is intended or not. So, yeah.
Case. And I've also talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me, and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's many different pieces of evidence that all converge on something like the practical and conceptual utility of my approach. Now, is it the same? There is a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right? Be the most plausible, because in regards
it's an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt, and that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result in an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality, right? So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming,
not unique to
Christianity, voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of a classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that. Like do
protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about like how these interpretations of the Bible, like if they kind of resonate with us. And I think, but I do, and I think that can in some case be some kind of like evidence, oh, this might be true, but I think we need to ask, is this evidence damning, right? Is this evidence certain, right?
Yeah.
So, but I do want to look at, again, the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at, again, the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah, so I believe this is a meta-truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all true and dandy, and I'm sure that there is in some way, the story was put in here for the reason, right? To tell us about, fights between brothers. But also, you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological, historical sense, as a historical fact. Were there two people like that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but I'm not sure why it matters to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says, and the things,
many ways.
Right. But like, if we interpret
sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes facts.
But for example, Jordan. The reason why it's important, right, very important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's like 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just like, you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins.
True.
So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, like, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, like even as just like events, like, because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happened, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of like the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to like our fate. Do you see what I'm saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that?
So
you pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well,
I think
there's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling. I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture. I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of...
So here's the problem. He's defining God as conscience. The problem is the Bible directly says that differently. It says that if you don't believe that God directly, or that Jesus resurrected, died on the cross and was bodily resurrected, you're not going to heaven. So if someone, according to the Christian doctrine, just believes in God as conscience and not that Jesus was the Son of God, that he died on the cross, he died for your sins, and that he was bodily resurrected to heaven, then it just doesn't work. Then you don't. So Jordan Peterson is advocating, as a supposed Christian, for an understanding of God that, according to the Bible, will send you to hell. In what world is he a Christian? He's not.
A society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking. It's the case that forever, when people have been interpreting religious stories, they wrestled with exactly the question that you just described. When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time-bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for eternity or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why
I don't concern myself so much with that particular question.
Shocking.
That would be something.
As a supposed Christian, you don't concern yourself with the question of whether or not you're going to go to heaven or hell. What? He's not a Christian, but like, I don't know, it's just, I feel bad for the people in the circle because they came into this thinking they would be speaking with a Christian who would defend basic fucking Christian doctrine of if you don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, then you will go to hell. And there's just someone here who's rejecting that. It's going into a debate with someone and they're just not who you agreed to, frankly. These people are debating someone who's not a Christian, who they don't. So unfortunately, they prepared for like someone and they're just not that person, and that's very unfair to them. So Zena and all of them really are doing a great job, but like it's really ridiculous.
That would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint, and I'm not putting that down, by the way. You're asking me a question I really can't answer.
Okay.
I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled with your framework and pushed it kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, you see, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. Well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it. Not really. It doesn't provide you with the foundation for navigation. But knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is like an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that,
why is the burden on Christianity?
They're the ones making the truth claims.
Right, the disinterpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty, right, that can
what evidence would you accept?
That would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack and then kind of get to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Let's pause there. I'm sorry, that's time.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the rest.
Well, I definitely picked the right person.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you so much.
Very good. I don't like talking to win, but there were portions of all the conversations that were truly productive, and that it's instructive for people to see the distinction between a debate that's aimed at local victory and dominance, let's say, even of ideas, and a discussion that's predicated on mutual exploration and establishment of like a harmonious understanding and peace.
Jordan Peterson, out of all of the kind of theists that are on the internet, he is one of the better ones in regards to just like being genuine as a person. But I do feel like he does a lot of, I guess, wordplay that can make it a little bit difficult and kind of just muddies the waters in regard to what we define as Christianity and atheism.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking to him today. I think if the average person followed what Jordan Peterson said, they'd realize that fundamentally Jordan Peterson is not a Christian, in fact, uses many atheistic principles, and operated under bad faith by seeming to forget what basic words meant when he didn't want to answer a question.
Correct.
His definitions can kind of shift a little bit depending on the moment, and I think that he wasn't afraid to flex that definitional muscle.
I felt really good about our conversation. I thought that it highlighted some key issues in Jordan Peterson's theology. I hope he reflects on these issues and maybe deepens his perspective on them in the future.
With Zena, she was able to build up such a rapport that he chose her in the end, and they were able to have an extended dialogue, which is something I had hoped for. So maybe I learned a little something from Zena about being more cordial.
It's extraordinarily useful to be able to model productive debate and conversation for people and see how my thoughts were landing with people who are particularly skeptical, and to put that in front of a large audience and to assess the consequences.
All right, that's about it. In the middle, roughly. All right, so that's about it. All right, so that was definitely something. I am certainly exhausted. That was, I don't really have much to say that I haven't already said or hasn't already been said by others, but it's really exhausting to listen to people who just, are really not there to have a productive conversation. He's primarily there to muddy the waters and act like he doesn't know what words mean, like Cade said, so he doesn't have to answer questions. And it's really difficult to have a meaningful conversation with someone like that, because you're always playing a definitional game. This is what a lot of these guys do. I mean, it's what Andrew Wilson did in my debate. He's trying to get me to define words down to the basic level so that he can try to reduce things to absurdity or play stupid, and not like have a conversation with the audience in mind. You know what I mean? Most people who are watching the debate they already know the general idea of what Christians mean when they say God, and they want to see an actual Christian have this debate. Now, Jordan Peterson just fundamentally wasn't the person for this debate. It'd be really interesting to see someone else. For example, another person who does these street debates is Cliff Nechtel. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a bit insufferable. He's very preachy, but I feel like that would have been a more productive conversation in terms of someone who's actually willing to admit that they are Christian and defend Christianity instead of just running around, retreating into a semantic fog, as Greg put so brilliantly. But that's kind of it. I'm trying to churn these videos out quicker. I will say it's definitely exhausting to sit here for what has now been 2.5 hours. I guess one of the shorter ones, surprisingly. I guess there was just so much confusion happening that there sometimes wasn't a lot to comment on, or it was just the same thing over and over and things I already said. But that's kind of all I've got. So if you enjoyed this, definitely feel free to subscribe to this channel. Please do. As I said, I definitely have another debate coming up, or another appearance on Jubilee. Can't say too much more about it, but definitely stay tuned for that. And I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So definitely follow my other channels. I'll be posting clips of this on my Instagram and TikTok. And check out my other videos. I've done other reaction videos as well. So I know some people like to treat this like a podcast and just listen to it while they're doing chores around the house or something, and I greatly appreciate that. So absolutely, as always, definitely feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Want to hear what people are thinking. But other than that, everyone, take care.